Hello, and welcome to episode 13 of Romance Isn't Dead. And today we are diving into the world of fanfic. And y'all, this feels like episode 13 because this is like take 28. And we can't get through this thing, so please bear with us. I'm Sally.
I'm Ray, and we're not going to laugh much, we promise.
Oh my gosh. You would not, y'all, okay, anyway. Before we get down to what we're going to talk about, which is fan fiction, Ray, did you want to touch on some new stuff or new-ish things?
Well, newish. This isn't actually news of a new release, precisely, but Danielle Steele, whose new book I think Sally mentioned last week, has, she's got about 4 new books coming out between now and the end of 2020. I have one question for her as someone who's been sitting on the same novel for the last, what feels like 10,000 years. How do you do it? Seriously.
It's been 84 years.
It does. It feels like I've been working on it for millennia, but, anybody who can write that amount of content, so jealous. Of course, as with every month, if you're a romance reader, you may well have started off with Harlequin or Mills and Boon books, and they have got so many coming out. I think I scrolled through about 4 pages on Amazon. So you've got a lot to choose from. They're ideal for the daily short commute if you like reading them. Of course, you could be listening to this instead. What do you reckon?
Well, I would simply say I would much prefer to be listening to a podcast than reading a Mills and Boon. But anyhow, hey, it's me, and I might be a little biased, but but I don't really have any new releases right now that I'm looking forward to that I've really done a whole lot of research on. One thing I just want to say as a note of caution for all readers out there, that you probably already know this, but sometimes booksellers and publishers like to repackage books and series. So just sort of be aware of that when you're doing this. And that's one nice thing about the Kindle. It'll tell you, hey, you bought this book on, whatever date. But it's like dirty pool. But sometimes, especially if it's like a very important, or not important, but very prolific author, they'll republish things.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's wrong, but it's kind of wrong.
I have to be honest, I actually was looking through books a couple of weeks ago, and I saw a title that really appealed to me. Mm-hmm. And the summary sounded a little bit familiar, but not really. And I went to download it, and my Kindle actually said to me, "You've already downloaded this book." Mm-hmm. And they not only had the name of the author changed, I'm guessing she started publishing under her own name, but the title of the book had changed as well. No telling a lie, the title of the book had changed, and that threw me. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess it's just sort of a buyer beware thing that we're throwing out there for you. We had a discussion or a shout out from an author on Twitter. Ray, did you want to tell us about this book?
Yeah, an author, Stephanie Terrell, sent us a message on Twitter about her novel, White Abyss. We will post a link to it down in the notes. It's about a soldier who has returned from fighting in the Vietnam War, and he's faced with another battle on the home front. He's trying to save his marriage and also fight his internal demons. So, as I said, I will post a link to that in the comments below. And if you are an author or you've got a book that you really, really love, send us a message. We will always mention it.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to hear from her, and I'll have to check that book out at some point soon. Okay, so today we were going to talk a little bit about fan fiction, which might not be an area of writing that our listeners have ever delved into. I will tell the story real quickly. My first venture into fanfic was actually waiting. No, I wasn't waiting. I had seen the movie Pitch Perfect.
Wow, so that was what, 2012?
2012. I'd seen the movie Pitch Perfect, and I thought it was very amusing. But this is 2014 when I'm doing this. And I would say it was late 2014, and I was on the internet and I was looking for Pitch Perfect stuff. And I think I was looking for leaks or something like that about the new movie. And then I saw this story and it was about Donald and Stacy. And I went and I read it. And I was like, oh, wow. And from there, I just kind of dove into fanfic. From there, I went briefly to the Hunger Games. But the reality for me is the Hunger Games is maybe a little too realistic in our dystopian lives. But I kind of moved on from that very quickly as well. Maybe I just didn't find the right story. And then I went into Harry Potter fanfic and fell into Hermione, which sort of, like, the first one I read, like, lengthwise, was Isolation. So, and I dove into Harry Potter fanfic.
Oh, yeah. For anyone that doesn't know, Hermione is Draco Malfoy and Hermione Granger. So, as both Sally and I are fanfic authors, I'm not so prolific I'm not at all prolific in Harry Potter, but we will probably be mentioning a lot of shipper names, and that means relationship names that you might not be familiar with if you aren't in the world of Harry Potter or fanfic in general. We will list a summary of them below, any that we mention, just so we can clear things up.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think it's worth noting too that this notion of shipping, it gets kind of a bad rap, and shipping did not start with, as very derisive fanboys would like to say, Twilight. It did not start there at all. Shipping, like, as a term, as I understand it, started with the X-Files, and it was Mulder and Scully. People who wanted a relationship between Mulder and Scully were relation shippers, and it eventually sort of got shortened to shippers and shipping. And I'll be honest, the X-Files was one of my very first fandoms, and I didn't engage with the fandom a whole lot, but I adore Mulder and Scully. Like, those two just to this day are my jam. So we'll just let that, I'll just put that out there as sort of a full disclosure thing. I love Mulder and Scully together.
Was it the Cranberries who had a song that had the lines, "It's a case for Mulder and Scully"? Because I've now got that in my head.
I don't know. This really is an episode. Maybe we should be talking about the X-Files for episode 13 instead of Potter.
Maybe.
Okay. So, yeah. So it's been around since the 90s. But I think it's around before then, right? Fan fiction has been around since Star Trek.
Yeah,
with
Star Trek
with the fanzines.
Yeah, Star Trek fanzines. They had fanfic. They are probably the original. I hate the term, but they were the original fanboys. And actually, one of the rather famous screenwriter got his start in, I believe, in Star Trek fanfiction writing.
Wow. Well, and then the other thing, it's worth noting that there are authors, like published authors, that got their start in fanfic. And even Claudia Gray, who currently writes has written several books for Star Wars, but has other books. She got her start in fanfic, and she actually did a panel at Star Wars Celebration that talked about fanfic. You want to go pro, and talked about how to go from fanfic to original fic and getting published and all that stuff. And so I've been listening to that. I mean, it's not the best audio on a pod, but you've got to remember she was basically doing a round table at a con. So that audio isn't fantastic, but if you'd like to give that a listen, it is What the Force podcast, and I don't know the exact title of it, but it's basically Claudia Gray's So You Want to Go Pro. And I find it interesting, even fascinating, and I would tell anyone who was a fanfic or is a fanfic author to, hey, give that a shout out or listen if they plan to go pro. And one of the most interesting things that she said to me is to never stop writing fanfic, because she used the analogy of, as an author, your fanfic is your crush, and your original work is your spouse. And I was like, oh, I get it. Because you, like with a marriage, you really put the work in, and with a fanfic, you don't necessarily have to put all the work in.
But that's the thing with a fanfic, the characterization is already there. The universe has already been created. We don't have to create all of that
from whole cloth, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you've got it. There is still some effort there because you are putting your own spin on things. I mean, you've written a couple that are epic. Well, not quite epic, but they are over 100,000 words. And
they're almost 100,000.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of words to write. Even if it's not your own universe, it's still a lot of effort. You're still having to contemplate and consider conversation, narrative, and everything else. So you're still putting effort in. It's not as though you're sitting there going, la, 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 la. I still get writer's block writing fanfic. I think it took me a year. I think it took me a year to write a 20,000 word fanfic. Mostly because I sat there staring at a blank screen for probably 6 months. So it still takes effort. But it's also a really good way of bonding.
It is. And Ray and I should probably, in full disclosure, tell you that we met on a forum set up for HP fanfic authors, where Ray was there before I was. I'm not sure how much before I was.
Probably a few weeks.
But I had started my very first fanfic, and instead of doing something like, a one chapter, or a two shot, which is a 2 chapter, instead of doing that, I thought I would just go ahead and dive in and write a long form fic. And it wound up being, I think, 88,000 words. So, I mean, it's novel length, short novel length. And, but I don't know what I was thinking diving in with that, but I got an invite to join that particular authors group from that fanfic. And then I decided to challenge myself and write another pairing within the Harry Potter universe, a pairing which in the final analysis I think I prefer, but it's tricky because, well, you have to make tension there that's not there. And yeah. And that's one nice thing about Hermione. With Hermione, you've got this automatic tension where they are definitively enemies, so you don't have to manufacture a tension.
It's a classic trope.
Right. And enemies to lovers, I mean, if you are familiar with romance novels, you are familiar with an enemies to lovers trope. You are going to see that a lot. You see it in movies, you see it in writing. And there's really, I'm trying to think how to put this without diving into Star Wars and the shaming that goes on, but generally speaking, folks don't necessarily have a problem with enemies to lovers tropes. And so, but as always, you have the purity police that come flying out and say, oh my gosh, how can you possibly ship this beautiful cinnamon roll with, this horrible, evil person? You must be a terrible person yourself. I mean, you get that. And I do not know why. I don't. It's fiction. It's a good place to explore things that you maybe would never explore in real life. I don't know. It is what it is, I guess. Ray, I feel like I'm dominating the conversation here. Apologies.
Well, that's absolutely fine. It's quite interesting. I have to admit, I started writing fan fiction back in 97. Wow, that's 22 years ago. That's quite scary. And I started writing fanfic in Buffy, in the Buffy fandom. And my original, I have full disclosure, Buffy is not my favourite character. I actually started writing fanfiction pairing Willow with Angel. And I'm hearing the virtual screams right now, but that is how I started. And
now, was that a pairing that was already within the canon or within the fanon, or was that something, were you the only one writing that, or was it niche?
It was niche, but there were a few. I mean, I'm sure that I'm not the only person that looked at Buffy and thought, I loved the Willow character, and I identified with her as the geek who didn't quite fit in. So of course I'm going to write about
Yeah,
her.
of course, of course.
That's the epitome of Mary Sue, right?
Mm-hmm.
You insert yourself into the character and you write about situations that you kind of would like to be in, but not quite, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved on to Willow and Spike when he arrived in season 2, and then I found Roswell.
Now, was there a lot were the Purity Police out in force about Spike? Because Spike was a villain who
Yeah,
sort of turns into maybe an
yeah, but then
anti-villain.
Angel turned into a villain in season 2, to be fair.
Yeah.
Spoiler, if you have never seen Buffy, Angel turns into a bad guy in season 2. But we are talking about something that was aired 21 years ago. So if you haven't
Right.
seen it by now, good grief, where have you been?
Well, I mean, but if you haven't seen it, the reality is you're probably not going to see it, and you don't care that that's a spoiler.
Exactly. That is true.
Yeah.
And then I started watching Roswell,
Mm-hmm.
not the new one. Not the new one. I'm gonna reiterate, not the new one. I watched the original Roswell
I
that
remember
aired
really
in
enjoying that one.
the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Very late 90s. I think it started in 99. I went to conventions. I wrote over 180 fanfics in Roswell. Some of them were 75,000 words long, others were multiple story fics, series, and things like that. And I really did write a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote 180 stories in 18 months. That was 10 stories a month on average. And I have no idea where I found the time, but I found my shipping heaven. And there was the one thing I will say about shipping in fanfic now is that it's become quite backbitey.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't like the ship that someone else ships, then you are automatically almost their enemy. Whereas when I first started out 20 odd years ago, you didn't see that so much. But then the landscape has changed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this didn't start out as a conversation about how fanfic how fanfic fits into the landscape. However, it did change.
Mm-hmm.
I went away from fanfic for a few years because I went back to university, and when I came back, it was almost as though I was entering a completely different world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which was scary.
Yeah.
Actually.
Well, I would like to just sort of say this just to kind of bring it back to sort of more like today, right?
Yeah.
I published most of my work, and it remains published on fanfic.net, although I think, Ray, you've mentioned that the future of fanfic.net is very much in question in Europe due to copyright changes.
Yeah.
And
Articles 11 and 13, guys, look them up if you're not aware of them. They have now passed in Europe.
Okay. And so AO3, which is an archive of our own, is where I think it's getting more and more fiction housed there. And
yes, they actually bring archives into their archive, and they are a charity.
Okay, so
which is why their future's not in so much question.
Right, and so I think today you tend to find a lot of folks. I think people find their fanfic home, right? And
yeah,
I do know that on fanfic.net you've got just an overwhelming amount of fanfic. To choose from, and Harry Potter probably at this point has over 1 million works. I haven't looked recently, but in reading fanfic, I think the first fanfic that full-length fanfic that I read for Harry Potter was Isolation by Bex Chan, and it has an insane number of reviews on it. And then the other thing is, I'm still reading 1 HP fanfic right now. And it is it has been going on for an astonishing 9 years.
That's a long time. How long did it take Margaret Mitchell to write Gone with the Wind? Was it 10 years?
I don't know, but not, and to be fair, this fanfic is over 400,000 words and 66 chapters. So if it isn't the length of Gone with the Wind, it is rivaling it. And it is the mighty RZZMG with Eros and Psyche. I cannot tell you to pick this fanfic up and read it unless you do not mind taking the risk of the hours of your life not paying off with a fic that's not going to be finished. I know she's planning on finishing it, but you know, that's the downside of fanfic, right? You're never quite sure if the author's going to finish it. But I would tell you not to steer away from fanfic just because of that. First of all, you could just read completed works. Or I would tell you should read works that are in progress as well, and try to encourage the authors to continue, because the reality of the situation is that your words to an author matter. And
they do.
And here's the other thing. When you are reviewing for fanfic, you need to take it to heart. That old saw. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Keep your mouth closed if you hate it. If you hate it, hit the back button and just don't go back to it. Don't take the time to tell the author, I just don't really like this, so I'm not going to keep on reading. They don't need to know.
Ultimately, they don't care. If you've read it and you didn't like it, don't share it with don't share it with the universe.
I mean, you know, the thing about Eros and Psyche, right? I know you didn't. This isn't a fic that you've read. You kind of checked out after a few chapters. Yeah. But I really enjoyed her writing style, and I enjoy the fic. The only reason I'm telling you maybe don't start it is if you're concerned that she won't finish it. And that, you know what? She didn't update for 2 years. That's a concern. If you're trying to read a fic. But I enjoyed the story, so I read it anyway. And there are plenty of completed fanfics out there, but I really am of the camp that these fanfic authors are writing in their free time. They are publishing it for free to entertain you, and they don't owe you anything.
See, that's the thing with fanfic. You cannot make money off it.
No, you can't. You can't.
It's a copyright thing, which is obvious because you are using somebody else's creations, but you cannot make money from it. Therefore, people are doing this partially because it's great practice if you are a published author, and there are authors who have, off the back of their fanfic, become published authors.
Yeah, now
the most famous one, I'm going to say here, unfortunately, is E.L. James. And she did, for a very long time, give a very bad rep to fanfiction authors.
But those stories are very rare, right? But I still think that writing fanfic is a way to practice your craft. And the other thing is, if you are, according to Claudia Gray, again, that podcast I just listened to yesterday, she was saying that, you know, if you are a published author and you've got writer's block and you really need some feedback, write a quick fanfic, publish it, and you will get feedback. Because if you are an author and you're writing original work and it's going to be published in novel form or whatever, you may be waiting a year for feedback from someone who's not your editor, right? So
you'll be waiting longer than that, to be fair. Yes. Because the only feedback you're going to get, realistically speaking, is going to be the review that is published in a magazine or a newspaper. You don't get the same kind of contact with your readers as you do when you're writing fanfic.
You might get a little bit more now that author websites are so prevalent, but even so, I'm not sure. You know what I mean? I'm not sure. But I think as a reader, you can find great things in fanfic, but you can also find things that you don't want to read. And all you need to do is just hit back. Say no.
Oh, I am very, very good at doing that.
That's all I can say. Just hit the back button,
there
because there's no need.
So much out. Yeah, there is so much out there that if you find something you don't like, it's kind of like a TV show. If you don't like the TV show, don't post a 10,000 word review telling people why you didn't like it. Just don't watch it again.
Well, and you know, if you're in a conversation with someone, you can say, I didn't enjoy it, and move on. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time with it. Now, I do know, I don't read as much fanfic as I used to read, but in the Star Wars fandom, the fanfic that I read obviously is Reylo, which is Rey and,
Of course.
and Ben Solo, or Kylo Ren, depending on, I guess, your point of view. But they've got some great stuff in that fan. But one thing I've noticed is fanfic authors in Star Wars often write in the present tense, which, you know how that makes me go,
Oh, yeah.
But
oh, yeah. We could have an entire rant about that alone.
Yeah. But, you know, yeah.
She's being a contortionist on the screen right now.
Yeah, I just don't understand. So anyway, so Ray, was there a fanfic that brought you into HP, or is there a fanfic that you enjoy?
I can't remember HP. I think
So what are you reading now?
What am I reading now? I am reading right now. I am entrenched in the MCU, so Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Right.
I haven't been able to find my true. It sounds so lame, but I haven't been able to find my true home fanfic wise for a really long time. When Roswell finished in 2002, there were a glut of fanfics for a while. Then I found Veronica Mars. Then I was sort of veering towards Harry Potter. I wrote a few, read a few, and then I went to university, and 5 years of my life was spent studying literature rather than writing anything. So then I came back, and I can honestly say I don't think there is one Harry Potter fiction that I have read that really spoke to me. Is that a bad thing?
It's just a thing.
Yeah, I don't think I've read anything that has absorbed me to the point that I think there are a few fics that I'll go back to occasionally and I'll have bookmarked, but it's not because they are so incredibly awesome that I'm mind blown by them. I think it's more that they're an amusement. They're a way to pass the time. Books speak to me far more. That sounds so bad. As a fan fiction author, I'd love to think that people read my work and think, oh my God, that's amazing. But I don't think I've written anything like that yet.
Interesting. So you're reading MCU now?
Yes, I am. Okay. I have been for the last 3 years, I think.
Okay.
God, has it been that long?
It's been a while. I mean, it's been a while. I'm not sure when your last one came out, but I do know that it's been some time. And I actually have to write a Harry Potter fanfic here in the next few weeks.
Yeah, we've been talking about this one for a while.
Yeah. So if anyone has a suggestion for a plot for a relatively short Harry Potter fanfic, thanks.
Oh, you're actually begging our listeners now for ideas.
Let me know.
That's great.
Let me know. I've got some thoughts. I'm just scared because I'm so entrenched in Star Wars right now. So it's like everything I'm thinking is a crossover, which in and of itself is terrifying. But I'm thinking it might be an excerpt from a bigger crossover might be the way to go. We'll see.
And here I am sitting here shaking my head. I don't know what it is, but crossovers always strike me as something that are A, terrifying, and B, I avoid like the plague, but that's personal feeling.
A crossover, for the record, is a fic that is set in two separate universes and the author mashes them together. So I'm speaking specifically of a Harry Potter Star Wars crossover, mashing the two together and bringing a few characters from Star Wars actually into Harry Potter. But I don't know if that's going to happen. We'll see. It's fine. It's fine. We're all fine. It's fine.
Yes, you've said that how many times? Methinks she doth protest too
It's
much.
not fine. It's not fine at all, but I'm going with it's fine, okay?
I believe you, so many thousands wouldn't.
It's not fine. Okay, y'all. I think, is that all we wanted to say today about
I
fanfic?
I think, well, I don't think we actually really said much about fanfic, if
We
we're being
did. We
not about romance.
did.
We didn't really speak about romance, which is,
Well,
but
that's the
ultimately,
basis for a lot of fanfic, though, isn't it? The ship. We
that
talked
is
about
true.
shipping, and shipping at its heart is very often romantic shipping, like romantic pairings. So we're
Who,
definitely romance adjacent.
as a reader rather than a writer, who do you ship?
As a reader, who do I ship?
As a reader,
In
see
what
that?
fandom?
Oh, that's a good one. In Harry Potter,
In Harry Potter, I ship Harry and Hermione, and I also,
that's
to a
that's
less,
Harmony.
yeah, Harmony, and to a lesser extent, I ship Harry and Draco, or not Harry. That's a really popular one. I ship Hermione and Draco. I don't ship Jerry. But I do ship Hermione. As main pairings, although I don't object to other pairings as well. Like I really like Longer, which is something that I made up with another fanfic author. It's also called Nevmione, which I think is bleh, so we call it Longer, which is Neville Longbottom and Hermione Granger. Longer.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So Long and Granger. Longer. Yeah.
Yeah.
I ship that too. Because Hermione's awesome. And
See,
I love
these are
Hermione.
characters that, though I find the term personally offensive, um, that's a personal feeling. They call these characters. I write one that's Darcy Lewis in the Thor movies, not the comic books, though she has been introduced in later ones. They call them the fandom bicycles, which is such a horrible
That's
term.
horrific, and I refuse
It
to
is
use
horrific.
it.
It is horrific.
I refuse to use it.
I see it occasionally in fanfics, and it sounds really bad, but I will avoid the fanfics where people use that as the term for description for the character. But this is what they call the characters who can be paired across the board. So, though we haven't really touched on it that much, Hermione is quite often paired with Snape, with Remus Lupin, with
Okay, and let me clarify. I said just now. The
yeah,
reason I am a teacher, so it's a personal trigger for me to have Hermione paired with any teacher. And that's my
hmm
problem. And I'm not judging anyone who personally enjoys that. It's totally fine. You do you. It's just not my thing. And
yeah,
so, and I didn't mean to do it out loud. I just did. And I'm like, wait, I have to
yeah.
clarify what's going on there. So,
But ultimately, they do the term, which is offensive and does make me shudder just a little bit, refers to the fact that these characters are so versatile in fanfic writing that they are paired with so many other characters across the board. I mean, so many.
yeah, yeah. And that's
You just need
difficult.
to, yeah,
Yeah,
it is difficult.
yeah. But I think people just need to understand that's the thing. Okay. So, and who do you ship?
In Harry Potter, I used to ship, I actually started off as a Draco Ginny fan
Mm-hmm.
and writer. That was my first foray. And bearing in mind, we are talking about my first foray was back in 2002,
Mm-hmm.
when just after the first film had actually come out.
Mm-hmm.
So we are going back a very long way.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first pairing. But I think it was, in a way, it was because I'd come from writing and reading Buffy, and Willow and Spike were my favourite pairing.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, I saw them as kind of mini Willow and Spike.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I can see that.
Yeah, so that's where I started.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of moved into Dramione, so Draco Hermione. Um, there were there was such a versatile and such a large number of fics to read. But none of them stick out in my head as, oh my God, that's the first one I think of when I think of fanfic. I haven't read Harry Potter fanfic in nearly 4 years now.
Unless I force you to read a chapter of mine.
Yeah, that's fine. That's different. You're my friend.
So she'll read to beta, but she won't read for pleasure. That's fair enough. Okay,
Yeah.
So we've been talking for over 30 minutes, so we probably should wrap this up. And if you have recommendations in Harry Potter fanfic, I would personally like to hear them. If you have recommendations for a Harry Potter short fic, Harry Hermione, I would love to hear those too.
She's not fake, I promise.
Yeah. And hey, if you've got a really good plot, we'll talk about it here on the podcast. So, anyway, I think that's it for today, isn't it? What book we're reading?
We are reading Frontier Woman by Joan Johnston.
Okay, and that was originally published in brace yourselves, people, 88, is that right?
That is right.
It was republished way back.
Yeah, republished in 2002 and then again repackaged and republished in 2008. So it goes back to what we were discussing earlier with how they repackage things. So
it will be interesting to see, given that they've repackaged, how it ages. You know what I mean?
I wonder if they changed anything.
That's a good question, because I'm not going to know, because I didn't read it in 1988 or 1989 or whenever, shortly after it came out. So I'm looking forward to having that discussion. And how would you like to sign out, Ray?
I would like to say keep on searching for your happily ever after.
And I would just remind you that romance isn't dead. It's alive and well on your bookshelf. Bye.
Bye.